I'd like to bring you up to date with what's happening in the Chess Legends tournament. We're into the knockout stage. Magnus Carlsen blew away Peter Svidler in one semi-final. And in the other semi, we had a very close match between Nepomniachtchi and Anish Giri. Nepo won the first day, the first set, convincingly. The second day, Anish Giri showed great grit to fight back and just edge out Nepo to win the second set. So one set all, and they went into a deciding third set. Lots of draws, and they went into two blitz tiebreakers. First game was drawn, and this is the second blitz game. Nepo with the white pieces. Now in this match, we saw a real struggle between the more creative and faster Nepomniachtchi and Anish Giri, showing determination, showing on occasion very good opening preparation, and holding his own. Certainly in this third day, it was very, very even. And I think this game typifies the difference in styles between the two players. So we have Nepo playing the Scotch, Giri playing knight f6, and here if white wants to play a very safe move, then knight c3 and then bishop b4, well, black is fine in this 4-knight Scotch. But instead, typically, Nepo exchanged on c6 and then played e5. Now this is a very, very old line, but it hasn't been worked out yet, even though this has been played for, well over 100 years. Queen e7 pins the e-pawn, so white plays queen e2. So already we've got a really unusual position. It's been played hundreds and hundreds of times, but still incredibly complex with these queens in very strange positions. And I think this kind of non-standard position really suits Nepo very well. At least that was his idea, to try and trip up Giri. So c4 is common here. Lately, h4 has been played a lot. And that's the move that Nepo played. In fact, these players had played this position before. So a5 from Giri to bring this bishop into play. c4, want to drive the knight back. And bishop a6 pins that c-pawn here. So both sides have the question, what do they do about their kings? How safe are they in the middle? Are they both going to go king side? Are they going to go queen side? Now previously, these two players have done battle in this exact position before, and Nepo played g3 to fianchetto the king's bishop, or potentially threaten that. But today, Nepo played knight d2. Knight b6 played. And now, I would say the normal move here is to play b3 and bishop b2, and then potentially castle queenside. But we had h5 from Nepo. Well, once again we've got the old rook's pawn advancing, and here I think it's quite possible that this rook is going to come into play. We've seen this quite a lot in this variation, that on occasion it swings into action in the middle, sometimes even right across the board. And it's kind of interesting to see how far this rook's pawn advances up the board as well. I do think that black should just castle here and try to exploit the fact that white has been, a little bit tardy with his development. But Giri played queen e6. h6 came anyway, and this was taken. b3, castles queenside, and bishop b2. So white is getting round to development. Bishop g7 looks reasonable. put some pressure on pawn on e5, and castles queenside. So both sides have brought their kings to, well, I was going to say safety. Let's qualify that and say relative safety. Slightly odd position for black with this advanced pawn, and white's king. Well, I think it would feel safer if it had these pawns back here, but that's just not possible. But anyway, relative safety. Rook e8 looks reasonable to put some pressure on the pawn on e5, and now f4. And we have a critical situation on the board. Because if white can maintain this pawn on e5, supported by f4, now this is a beautiful pawn duo, and you can see that because this h-pawn has advanced and knocked out that g-pawn, then black can't entertain ideas of hitting out with g5. And if white gets a grip here, then these pawns are looking really strong and those pawns looking very weak on the h-file. Big positional advantage. So really black has to hit out here. So do you go with the f-pawn or do you go with the d-pawn, 1 square or 2 squares? Well, d5 seems like a reasonable option, but it's very, very unclear because white has this, and this opens up this diagonal after bishop takes queen, pawn takes queen, bishop takes rook, pawn takes pawn. I mean, these are the kind of crazy variations one would have to consider. Check, and then rook takes d1. Probably better for white, but white has sacked an exchange, but still has those pawns intact here. In any case, one would have to consider this move. But instead we had f6 from Giri, so chooses to break down the e-pawn in this way. Knight e4, and now things start to fly. Now, remember, this queen was moved up to e6 a few moves ago, and I have to say we have to question that decision because here you can see once the knight reaches e4, then it threatens to come into c5. But this is, well, black has to allow this. If the bishop drops back, because it's vulnerable on a6, then white can take on f6 and play rook takes and exploit that pin. And, well, that rook comes into the game absolutely beautifully on the h-file. So after knight e4, that's the last move, f takes e5, knight c5, queen f5, knight takes bishop. So at the moment, white is a piece up. However, after pawn takes pawn, black has a lot of pawns, opens up the e-file. That knight can't return to c5. It's a crazy position. White has to move the queen. Well, I say that because at first when I was looking at this live, I thought, well, this is a perfect opportunity to sacrifice the queen here. But actually, this doesn't work. I'm sure the Nepo had seen the possibility, but here is the problem. You play f3, and once that is taken, then we have queen g5 check, picking up that bishop. That's actually a really important tactic. So e takes f4 just played. The queen moved to d3. Queen d2 also possible, but queen d3 is decent. So now these bishops are opposed. So bishop takes bishop, check. King takes bishop. Remember, white is a piece up here. So black doesn't want to exchange yet, because the knight might have that possibility to come out. So queen e5 check, queen c3, king b7, the king comes up to take that knight. And Nepo exchanges queens on e5. And here's an interesting moment, because I think Nepo plays a very practical move. He could try to keep some material advantage here by playing b4. Might be able to protect that knight, might be able to bring it out. And after king takes c5 check, this is quite typical of the kind of weird tactics you have in this particular variation. So the king goes back, pawn takes knight, king takes. Now here, white is a piece up, but black has a lot of pawns for the piece, but also white's king position is really exposed now. And I just wonder whether Nepo thought too much hassle. It's just, in practical terms, very risky to go for that. He chose to play in a very practical way. Rook takes. So now pawn to c5. That blocks the c-pawn, so prevents that discovered check. Knight takes pawn, rook takes, and rook takes pawn. So material is now even. However, that knight is actually very poorly placed on b6. And this bishop, as we're about to see, has great potential. So rook f8. Now that was played to prevent white from scooping up that pawn. And now here is a really important maneuver. Bishop e2. That bishop is going to lock itself on f3, protecting the g-pawn. Well, they protect each other, blocking that f-pawn. And then the rooks have complete freedom to roam around the position. And black is in trouble there. I think white just has a huge positional advantage. Here, in fact, Giri blundered straight away. He played d6, which allows rook takes pawn. Nepo didn't see it. Instead, he just carried on with his plan of putting the bishop on this wonderful square. And now the moment has passed. Obviously, there's no pin on the 7th rank. And he played rook e1. But in continuing with his positional plan of just anchoring the bishop on f3, he has a huge advantage here. Those rooks active. This rook wants to come down to the 7th, obviously. And, well, those rooks not working well together. They're split at the moment. It's just a great position for white. And, yeah, as was the case throughout this match, Nepo had a time advantage as well in this game, which obviously didn't help Giri. Rook e6, rook g5, king c3. Yep, no harm in just edging the king forward. Rook fg8. Well, the rooks are connected, but rook f7. So you just want to take that pawn. Rook e5, and the rook came over to h6. a4. Well, Giri just wants to exchange some pawns off, but I mean, there really isn't a good defense at this moment. That one could obviously be whipped off as well. But Nepo just played rook h7, doubling rooks, and this is fatal because if the rook comes to c5, then b4 just knocks the rook away. Notice how strong that bishop is, so secure, and also, as we're about to see, giving white actually a deadly attack on the queen side. White could just recapture the pawn here on b3, but no, rook c7, threatening a fatal check on b7. And here, Giri just had to give up rook for bishop to avoid immediate catastrophe. And now Nepo's the exchange up, and it's just a case of negotiating a few little tactics, but it's very easy. Rook b7 check, and now rook b3 is a very clean move, protecting the pawn on f3. A couple of spike check. Rook b4, just protecting. Check. King b2, rook takes pawn, and now rook h8 is fatal, winning the knight. Another check, and here Giri resigned. Crushing victory for Nepomniachtchi, and, well, once again, very creatively played by him. We saw that throughout this match. He was giving up material to get the initiative, and, well, for the most part, it worked very, very well. But, yeah, just that second set where he came unstuck. But I think we have two worthy finalists now. We have Magnus Carlsen, who looks in supreme form, and he plays, as we've seen now, against Jan Nepomniachtchi, who's also in great form. And I think it'll be a really interesting matchup because in the past, Carlsen has sometimes struggled against Nepo. So, well, We look forward to a fantastic final over the next few days, and I'll be reporting back to see how they get on. Thanks for watching.